Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Bases Loaded right here on OTF. I'm your host, Blake Munroe, where I'm joined weekly by CJ Vogel and Jeff Howe. And, gentlemen, we got quite a bit to talk about. No preview like we normally do for the weekend, but we can do a recap. And we'll start with yesterday's lone SEC tournament game for the Longhorns as they lose that one. But Texas falls to Tennessee. I'd like to get y'all's initial thoughts before we really dig into it.
It kind of checked all the boxes I wanted to check, with the exception of going into extra innings and maybe using some arms that you'd hope they wouldn't have to overextend. But, you know, you start looking at the pitch counts. I'll get to Ethan Walker in a second, but, you know, Saunier threw 19 pitches, Burns 33, Grubbs 35, Volantis 29. And really, other than Burns having a shaky start, Grubbs made one mistake, Volantis made a couple mistakes. You know, probably a decent amount of work for those guys just to help them stay in somewhat of a routine. But I like the fact that, you know, it was a competitive game. Could not have asked for a better start from Ethan Walker. And, you know, we started getting questions in the game thread over on ontexasfootball.com. Be like, where's Ethan Walker been? And I think Schloss laid it out during the game, man. They've been really working with him. You know, there were games, guys, you know, through conference play where they'd bring him in just to face a lefty, and that would be maybe the only action he'd get all weekend. So it's been a slow burn with him, but credit to Walker for putting in the work and Max Wiener for helping him make adjustments. So really, really pleased with Ethan Walker. I thought Casey Borba had a nice game at the plate. You know, there were some things we can talk about, but overall, man, got some good work done, competed, got the heck out of there, and now you get to get back home and get your feet up for a couple of days before the regional.
Yeah, I love the first four innings, and I think that's about where my love for that game yesterday about concluded. But you go out and you face Liam Doyle, and you kind of hit him around, right? The strikeout numbers are there. And that's a different conversation. We'll get to that here in a minute. But Doyle, one of the best strikeout pitchers in all of the country. Texas, a team that likes to strike out a lot. We knew that marriage was going to favor that of the Tennessee pitcher and the SEC pitcher of the year, but Texas got some good looks, right? And credit to some aggressive base running early on, get you a run, start the game off in that first inning. Ethan Mendoza, about a foot away from the opposite field, home run down the right field line. Who knows how the game would have gone had that ball carried out of the park, but you had some aggressive at-bats. And on top of that, you averaged about 20 pitches per inning for Doyle. If that's the approach and that's what we've seen from Texas, yeah, strikeout numbers will be there. Hopefully the walks are there to somewhat manage and balance that out. But if you're able to knock out a true number one 4 innings into a game at any point in this postseason, I like Texas's chances against just about anybody. Granted, we got to see what that, you know, Texas's own fielding and pitching looks like. But I was very pleased with that approach at the plate. Work the counts, foul off pitches that aren't there, and then be aggressive. And Texas, again, is when Doyle got knocked out is where my issue started to come in. They did a great job of getting him out of the game. It's all about capitalizing once you start digging into opposing teams' bullpens there.
Yeah, I'll real quick on that, CJ, because we talked about this on the Wednesday live stream where you, myself, and Rod Babers were on the Wednesday live stream. We talked about this. I felt like Texas had to be aggressive just from the standpoint of you facing Liam Doyle. You got to be ready to hunt fastballs, and you got to take advantage of hittable fastballs when they're there. I felt like they did that, but I'll give credit to Frank Anderson and Tony Vitello for their counter to that. Was Brent Arvidsson was so good with his breaking ball. I mean, that's one of the best breaking balls I've seen all year, and I don't know if it was a mentality thing or what it was, but, man, they could just not get a good feel for that breaking ball. Arvidsson made one mistake, and Max Ballou almost made him pay for it with a walk-off home run in the ninth, but didn't. You know, Max just got out a little bit too early on it. But, man, I just thought Arvidsson's breaking ball was so good. And, you know, it's a credit to him, and it's kind of a concern for Texas because they never really figured out how to handle that pitch.
One thing I wanted to bring up, fellas, is I was asked this morning on Coffee and Football multiple times. I think it's been all over social media, on OTF forum. Why didn't they load the bases and hope for a double play? That has been the hot talk. I've been asked that question more than any other question. So I had my own reasoning, but I checked in with a couple of people as well, kind of trying to get a good thought process for that. And it went along with what I was thinking. Volantis nails against left-handed hitters. You either face two lefties in a row with the free base, or you face a lefty and then one of the best right-handed hitters in the country. But curious to get y'all's thoughts on that whole idea. And I mean, it's just, like I said, it's been a very hot topic over the last 12, 16 hours.
Of course, it's going to be a hot topic because of the way that it worked out. But, you know, for Volantis going into matchup situations where it's lefty-lefty, look, Volantis is the freshman of the year in the SEC for a reason. Specifically against lefties, it makes sense to allow him to pitch. Now, sequentially with his pitches, there's one approach that I would have had, and I'm sure was echoed to him, is you can't give him anything good to hit, right? You throw the slider, you throw the slider, you throw the slider. That's all got to be away. It's got to be low. If there is contact, it's weak to the left side, and it keeps your infield in, something that allows that runner from third not to score. Everything in that at-bat should have been in the dirt. First two pitches, they were in the dirt. You held off, you hold off, and you look for your pitch as a hitter. That's the approach that you hope. Something elevated to drive a run in with less than 2 outs. Credit to Kylan for rocking that pitch right down the middle, but that's kind of the issue there, is you stick to your approach of slider, slider, slider. It's all going to be away. You miss one time against a good lineup like Tennessee, you're going to pay the price, and that's exactly what happened. Belt-high slider gets belted all the way to Tuscaloosa almost, and you got 2 runs that score with the base open. While the approach and the mindset was there, the execution was not, and that's where the second guessing is coming in. But I don't disagree with the idea to go after him. You got one of the best pitchers in the country on the hill in a pressure situation. I'll take those chances every time if I'm Dylan Volantis.
I'm kind of with you, Blake. You know, I always think of these decisions, and to me, it's different from decisions we see in football or basketball. Man, baseball decisions to me a lot of times are damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, what's the alternative there? You load the bases for Fisher? I mean, it's not a position. I mean, yeah. And look, if Fisher hits into a double play, then Schloss is a genius. If Fisher, clears the bases with an extra base hit, then he's an idiot. So, I mean, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I'm with you, CJ. I mean, Dylan Volantis has earned the right to compete in that situation. So, hey, put it this way. I'm glad they got that situation out of the way in Hoover, where, if we're being real, it didn't matter one bit. It has no bearing on the outcome of the season. Get that out of the way. So now if that comes up in the regional or in a super, now at least you've dealt with it, and Volantis has been there. So that's the kind of stuff you got to hunt and peck for to find positives in here. So I'm just glad they got that out of the way, and that wasn't like in an elimination game in a regional or a super where it would have ended your season.
Yeah, the one other thing I would add to that is I know that there's an emphasis on throwing pitches into the dirt, kind of wasting pitches, allowing opposing hitters to chase. Look, you got a runner on third. You don't necessarily want to go up and start bouncing pitches time and time again. But when you have an all-conference defensive catcher behind the plate with Rylan Galvan, I'd let him work and trust that my stuff is going to at least give the temptation of a chase to get into a favorable count there. So that I see some comments, and I know that we've talked about it in terms of throwing what is really just chase pitches away. With a catcher like Galvan, you trust that he's going to be a wall behind the plate, and that stuff is going to, kind of give that temptation again. So again, I don't second guess it.
By the way, I know Ethan Walker wasn't throwing hard yesterday, but I hope Schloss or Tulo or Nolan Kane, somebody told Rylan Galvan, look, appreciate the effort trying to barehand a ball to keep it from going to the backstop, but don't ever flip and do that again.
That was crazy.
Yeah, that was more than crazy.
I mean, that would have been, I can imagine, like, all I was thinking of, man, if his index finger or ring finger had been sticking out at the right angle and Galvan breaks a finger trying to barehand a pitch in a meaningless game, it would be one of those, man, this team might just be cursed with injuries. But thank goodness he's fine. And like I said, it kind of reminds you that scene in Major League where Willie Mays Hayes is coming back into the dugout after the basket catch, and Lou says, great catch, Hayes. Don't ever flip and do it again.
Well, before we move on, I need to tell everybody about one of our sponsors today. That's Chinook Seedery. Be sure to check them out in your favorite store or go online at ChinookSeedery.com. They got 8 amazing flavors. You're going to find one that you love And whether you're in the game or watching it, be sure to grab a bag of Chinook. Okay, let's see here. The next thing I wanted to bring up, guys, was another hot topic on coffee and football this morning, seeding. Now, I looked at D1 baseball seeding that was updated, just a couple of days ago. They still had Texas as the number one. You look at places like, Field of, I think, no disrespect to that organization, Field of 7 or 11.7, whatever. 11.7, there we go. They have Texas as 3. I think you can make an argument either or, but I'm curious to get y'all's take on that because, we know they're going to be top 8. There's no doubt about they're going to be top 8. They're going to be top 5. There's no doubt about that either. But do you see them as being a number 1? Do you see them as being a 2, 3? What is y'all's thinking on that?
I think the only way they're not a number 1 seed, the number 1 overall seed as we sit here right now, I think especially if Arkansas goes on and wins the SEC tournament, then I think you have to start looking at resumes. And maybe because Arkansas got the sweep over Texas, maybe you give the Hogs the number 1 overall seed. I think LSU, even though Texas won the head-to-head, I think if LSU ends up winning the conference tournament, I think then you look at their resume and they would LSU makes a strong case for it. But to me, at the end of the day, I'm kind of with Schloss, and I'm glad Schloss didn't sugarcoat anything when he was asked about it on Wednesday morning before they left for Hoover. They asked him about being the number 1 overall seed. He said point blank, it doesn't matter. Like they've got a top 8 locked up, so that they're fine with that. They pretty much know their path to Omaha if they want to get there through the regional and the super regional. So I don't know where you're at, CJ. I think there's a couple of teams that can make that argument that they could be the number 1 overall seed, but I don't see Texas dropping below maybe the number 4 overall national seed is about as low as I could see Texas dropping.
Yeah, I'm sure some folks might have differing opinions on this, but for me specifically, I'm kind of the mindset of who cares, right? You're a top 8 lock. You get to host your regional. You pass on beyond that, you get to host your super regional, right? And then you get to Omaha, and that's really when that 1, 2, 3, or 4 seeding matters. But until then, who cares, right? You're in a position to play on your home turf for the next 2 weekends. That's what truly matters until you get to Omaha. So for me, for Schloss and Jeff, I think we all kind of share that same sentiment of it doesn't matter a whole lot. Now, you could argue head-to-head, Texas, Arkansas. Arkansas gets the nod. Texas, LSU. Texas gets the nod over LSU. It doesn't make a whole much bit of difference to me. The one thing I'll say is if you're in that top 3 or 4 seed, you're basically set and just kind of hoping and praying that one of the teams that doesn't take care of their business ahead of you kind of set you up for even more favorable path in Omaha.
I'll trust Kendall, good friend of the show, Kendall Rogers, and the folks at D1. They do, I think, the best job covering college baseball. If they've got LSU in the 7 seed, then I don't see LSU jumping up that far. Vanderbilt's kind of interesting because they've been, if you want to talk about hottest teams in the country going into the tournament, certainly Vandy could wear that label. But I really think, man, I think your number 1 overall seed is going to end up being Texas or Arkansas. And Arkansas, if Arkansas wins the SEC tournament, they've got a great case because they swept Texas. They just finished 2 games behind Texas in the conference standings, and they would have won the conference tournament. So honestly, I don't see Texas being worse than the 2 guys, just looking at the way things stand right now, based on what we're seeing here from D1 baseball. Am I wrong, Blake? Or
no, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I have a hard time, because like I said, we were asked that this morning, and I went back and forth in my head for like 30 minutes arguing with myself. I have a hard time seeing them be lower than that. I think you got the top 2 nailed. And Vandy, obviously a very, very hot team as well. And I know we talked about this last week, guys, but 7 of the top 8 seeds, SEC, that's just insane to me.
Yeah,
absolutely insane.
And I'll tell you the depth of the league. When you just look at like this hypothetical bracket with Georgia Tech as the last national seed, the last host, man, if you've got Tennessee as the 2 in your region, that's the last thing I'd want to see is a team like Tennessee as the 2. And then look at that Fort Worth regional, with Arkansas and TCU matched up in the 2-15, to have UTSA as the 2 and OU as the 3. You want to go into a double elimination tournament having to deal with the Witherspoon brothers? Forget that, man. That is, I don't know, on paper, that would be, I think, would be the toughest regional for a host to get out of. Would be that Fort Worth regional. So that is
a tough one.
Crazy.
Los Angeles pretty tough as well.
Yeah, with Irvine and Virginia. So, I think this reinforces something for me, though, guys. I think we're starting to see, and I think the masses are starting to see, I don't think college baseball has ever been, the competitive balance in college baseball has never been greater than it is right now. If there was ever, because look, there's going to be a top 8 that doesn't advance. It happens every year. I think if there's a year where being the number 1 overall seed really doesn't matter, I think it's this year, because, man, you can make an argument. You can make an argument for, according to D1, for Coastal as the 10. I mean, I follow Sunbelt baseball decently enough to know that Coastal team is a really good baseball team. I mean, Florida State, you want to, if you're Auburn, you want to host Florida State for a super. I mean, that's a team that spent a good chunk of the year in the top 5. So it is, man, it's really good to see college baseball being this balanced, where none of these regionals are snoozers, man. Everybody, you've got a team that either they pitch really well, they hit really well, they come from a competitive league. You're gonna see some upsets in regionals for sure.
It's gonna be a fun postseason, no doubt.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Up next on the list, and this is a couple days old, and CJ, you actually alluded to it a little bit ago, talking about Volantis, but lots of awards came out for the Longhorns. For those not aware, of course, Schloss named SEC Coach of the Year, and then Volantis Freshman of the Year. Then we had a couple of first-team All-SEC guys, and Volantis once again, and then Rylan Galvan. And then defensive team All-SEC there. You got Mendoza, Gasparino, Galvan, and Schussler. So Longhorns hauling in those conference awards this year, fellas.
I think the two things, Aiden King at Florida and Derek Curiel at LSU made really compelling arguments for SEC Freshman of the Year. But for the coaches to vote Dylan Volantis in, I think that says a lot. And just the fact that you've got a legit stopper as a freshman. That's Houston Street type stuff, guys. That's stuff we haven't seen since, to start the way Dylan Volantis has started his career, those types of guys get their number up on the wall when they're done. So props to him. And then of the guys that I feel the best for, I feel good for all these guys and their awards, but man, for Kimball Schussler to be on the all defensive team at first base, when we talked about it, going into the year, I didn't know how that experiment was going to work, but he's been outstanding over there at first base and really being a veteran leader on the infield. So feel good for Schuss, good dude, and good for all those guys, man. And Rylan Galvan, just probably I think those 3 guys really, if you're going to pick a team MVP, Schussler, Galvan, Volantis, there are valid arguments to be made for all 3 of those guys.
Yeah, only 2 first-team selections, only 2 selections on the first 2 teams in the SEC for a team that is in contention to be a number 1 overall seed, and obviously already won the SEC regular title. But that doesn't bother me. It kind of more so speaks to kind of just the scrappiness that this team has always had to find ways to win games. You don't know really where it's coming. In one series, it's Will Gasparino going nuclear against Missouri. The next, it's Jaquay Stewart having a big-time home run against Georgia to get a series sweep going. So it all kind of just trickles down, right? Jalen Flores has been Mr. Clutch. You could really point to Ethan Mendoza and say there should be a case for him to be in this conversation. But aside from that, it kind of just whole lineup, whole pitching rotation, everybody's kind of contributed in their own, and they're going to need that coming up into the supers and anything beyond that.
And I think it speaks to also, CJ, why Schloss is very deserving of SEC Coach of the Year, not just because Texas won the league, but because the whole is a lot greater than the sum of the parts. You compare this Texas roster, and for Schloss and company to put it together on the fly, you compare this Texas roster to some others in the SEC, it's not the most talented. It's probably not going to have the most pros on it, but man, when they just get together, they by and large, they play good, clean baseball. They pitch well. They play good defense. And if they can get timely hitting, I'm with you, CJ. If they can be aggressive at the right times, that I can I can see Texas being one of, if not the last team standing in Omaha, just because this is such a good team in the true sense of the word.
And just think, guys, if Ballou doesn't get hurt, we probably see him on this as well. Of course, Ballou batting .337 since his return, but makes you wonder what if with that big chunk of games that he missed.
And in that same vein, Blake, if Jared Spencer doesn't get hurt, he's an all-SEC guy too.
Great point. Absolutely great point. Okay, well, before we move on to our last subject or two, I need to tell everybody about our other sponsor. Are you an avid fisherman who's always searching for the right supplies? Then do yourself a favor and check out tackleaddict.com. It's owned and operated by former Longhorn Brian Robinson and former Longhorn baseball great Brandon Belt. Tackle Addict has everything you need for the best in today's fishing equipment, and it's for the everyday fisherman and serious pros alike. Get their product shipped directly to you from the shores of Lake Sam Rayburn. That's Tackle Addict, ADDICT.com. And Brian and Brandon say hook 'em. A couple of other notes that I just wanted to mention before we get to our final subject. Don't forget the portal is going to open here in a couple of weeks, June 2nd through July 1st. Expect the Longhorns to be very, very active there. And then the selection show is Monday, 11 a.m. on ESPN2. So those are two very important dates to remember. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about, guys, is softball.
Hey, Blake, real quick, we on the OTF crew, we will have coverage of the selection show in some way, shape, or form. Just as of the time we're recording this, Texas hasn't ironed out completely what they're going to do. But I will be at Dish Falk on Monday for some sort of coverage for OTF for the selection show. So,
yeah. Good stuff for sure. We've been asked to do a live stream as well, so we may have to figure something out and bring Jeff in and out of that one. We'll get those details worked out for sure. All right, guys, softball backs against the wall. They lose game 1 to Clemson last night, 7-4. It's do or die tonight. That game 8:00 on ESPN2, but not the start that Coach White probably wanted for his team.
No, it's all about execution for Texas softball, and there's a pretty sizable lack of that on Thursday night game. And, it was a bit tough, right? And, I know both teams have to deal with it, but the weather delays a game that was already pretty late. That game probably wrapped up around 12:25 in the morning. So both teams have to deal with it. But look, you have an error at shortstop. You have an error in the field over at left field that allows a few runs to score. I know there's only one error on the box score, but those are plays a team like Texas should have made, right? A team top 3, top 4 overall seed should be making. You get runners on second and third, nobody out with the harder your order up, and you don't score to tie a game in the 4th inning. That's all about execution. That's all about finding the right pitches to drive, get a ball elevated, as we talked about in that Texas-Tennessee game. Look, you get people in scoring position. Those runs mean so much more in these situations. Texas not executing. You could have turned a 3-2 deficit into a 3-3 tie. Who knows what that turns into? 2 innings later, you're down 7-2. It's pretty significant right there. So it's all about execution in Texas right now. I think they're looking at each other in the mirror saying, it's on us to go figure this out and perform better on the field.
If there's a silver lining here, it's that Mike White and this crew were in this exact same position last year. Lost the first game of a super to A&M, had to win the next 2 at home. They did to get to Oklahoma City, so at least they've been here before.
Yes. And we had Coach White on Coffee and Football on Tuesday. So if you're a softball fan and you missed that interview, make sure to go back and watch it. He gives some very valuable insight into his whole process of facing off in the Super Regional against Clemson. So you don't want to miss that. All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Bases Loaded right here on Texas Football. Of course, we want to thank Tackle Addict and Chinook Seedery for sponsoring today's show. And as Jeff said, stay tuned over at ontexasfootball.com. We'll post some plans there on how coverage will go for Monday's selection show. And by the way, if you're not a member of ontexasfootball.com, use promo code OTFOG when you sign up. Let me save you a little money. You can lock in an annual subscription for just $49.95, but only if you use promo code OTFOG over at ontexasfootball.com.
If you don't sign up, CJ will throw his hat at you.
That's right.
You don't want that.
Well, now that you said that, I got to play the clip real quick before we get out of here.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
You don't want
like
that.
Like a Volantis slider, baby. Coming quick at you.
Oh, guys. Well, we will be back next week. So for CJ Vogel and Jeff Howe, I'm Blake Munroe, and we'll see you then.
Welcome.